Starting from being able to borrow zero, just after these changes, he can borrow $858,000.
If you're thinking property investing is out of reach for you, think again. As we unpack key changes you can make when trying to increase your borrowing power to build your property portfolio even better.
This is actually the cheapest debt you'll probably ever have. The easiest thing to control is that can in turn increase their borrowing capacity.
Morgan Bushell, successful property investor, mortgage broker, and founder of Full Circle Finance, walks us through what can be done to sometimes insanely increase your borrowing power.
What?
Let's put a plan in place for you to achieve your property goals.
Credit cards. If you use them properly, there's some amazing hacks out there.
This could be the difference in moving that needle.
These are the changes that are the difference between comfortable retirement and talking about what we should have done.
Using that same second tier lender, it actually increases to 766.
I'm just pausing for dramatic effect because
But the biggest impact, as we've kind of seen with these two examples, is
if you or anyone you know has either been wanting to buy their first property or increase the size of their portfolio, but thought they couldn't get the lending, this could be an incredibly helpful episode. But remember, even if your situation is similar to anything said on this episode, this is not financial advice. Take what you learn here today to a financial professional. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my chat with mortgage broker, Morgan Bushell. Morgan Bushell. How you going, man?
good. Thanks, mate. How are you?
Mate, I'm very good, and I'm pumped for this episode because this is going to be a cracker, especially this bonus at the end. I know it's not going to be for everyone, but if you're willing to really get into it, that can absolutely slingshot portfolio growth. It's a big call, doubling your borrowing power. After you and I had a bit of a chat though, it looks like in some cases this almost like quadruples borrowing power in certain aspects.
Yeah.
But before we get into all of the nitty-gritty details of John and Jim's situation, is there anything you wanted to kind of set the stage with this one, mate?
Yeah, I think before we kind of dive in, this is one of those things where it's really like cognizant of the using like an online calculator to calculate your borrowing capacity.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to be going through and unpacking, just kind of obliterates using that. This is where using a broker, systematically going through things to increase your borrowing capacity will matter a lot.
And I hear that all the time. People are like, oh yeah, I know I can only borrow $450, like I'm not ready, or I can only borrow $300, I can't even do anything. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Oh, well, I went on to blah, blah website. It's like, well, no, like go into the detail. And this, you're right, man, unpacking this is showing the importance of, it's not about doing every single one of these things because not everyone's situation could. But in some cases, just doing one is a game changer.
Absolutely.
Now, before we start getting into all of the variables that people can play with, and this is broken up into the three sections. So it's kind of the controllables, then we've got the actual property, then the lender type. Can you kind of paint Jim's situation and John's situation in a bit of detail so we can really understand our starting point?
Yeah, so with both of these scenarios, these are people who have got pretty decent incomes, and with both of them, these are people who are looking at buying their first investment property.
Okay.
They're both people who are renting at the moment. So in Sydney, we've done it based on that. And then they also have a bunch of smaller commitments as well that we're going to review.
And so rent-wise, so Jim's earning $90,000 a year and he's estimated to be paying $700 a week?
Yep.
Okay, and John's a family man. He's got one child and a partner, and he's paying $1,000 a week for rent.
Yes.
Okay, so in some states, really high. In some places, maybe a little bit lower.
Yep.
But it's a bit of an average to play with.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to know about their starting points before we get into controllable number one?
We've kind of modeled off them both trying to achieve an investment property of $500K, doing a 20% deposit, the loan being 5 years interest only, and that investment property achieving a 4.5% rental yield.
Okay. And currently, this is where it gets interesting, Jim's situation earning $90,000 a year and all of his commitments, what can he currently borrow?
Unfortunately, no bank will lend to him in that current situation.
Complete zeros.
Zero donuts.
Okay. Donuts. Now, how about John? 200K. He's got a bit of commitments as well. What can he borrow?
$76,000.
Okay. So neither of them are going shopping for property.
No.
Okay. Neither of them are going for shopping for property yet, I should say.
Yes.
Okay. What is the first change that they should be looking at and how much does it change things? Do you want to start with Jim?
So the first thing these guys should be changing, which is probably the easiest thing to control, is what they're spending their money on.
Okay.
So we're talking about standard living expenses. So really reviewing where their money goes and trying to reduce that as much as possible so that can in turn increase their borrowing capacity. And when you do this as well, this actually does have a flow-on effect. Like you'll probably be able to save more money.
Mm-hmm.
And then like an additional step to that is maybe with that extra money, you can put that towards a deposit, or if you've got smaller, like bad debt, I suppose, you can start using that extra money to chip away at that.
Okay. And this is why it's number one to look at.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. And so what are because it's HEM that you're referring to, the household expenditure measure, if I've got that right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
All right. And so what HEM have you used for gym?
Yeah. So for gym, we've used the total of 3,500.
And is that pretty normal, or is that a high spender? Where's that?
Look, that's a little bit on the high side for a single person.
Yeah.
But it's not crazy and it's not, very minimalist.
Okay. So it's not nuts, but yeah, a bit on the high side. Okay. And so what can he bring that down to? But again, being realistic.
Yeah, so if Jim wanted to get a bit more conservative with what he spends his money on, you're probably looking at around low 2,000s to like mid 2,500 per month.
All right, and if Jim lowers his HEM to around that, from 3.5 to around 2.5, so he's making some big cuts here, but nothing crazy. What does it change his borrowing power from 0 to what?
It doesn't move the needle a significant amount, but it increases to about $100,000.
Okay, so it's still tricky
Yeah.
for Jim, but this is only step one.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And what about John? He tightens his belt. He lowers his HEM. He was on $76,000, so he's not even getting a studio apartment anywhere. What does it jump up to for him?
Yeah, so if he gets a bit more strict with where he spends his money, you're probably looking at an increase of about low 100, so about 105.
Wow. Okay. So not a huge difference there, but still it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's about 105 grand. Okay. So they've both made some changes as far as what they're spending on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start talking about the debt side of things. How much? I'm assuming this is going to move the needle a little bit more. So if Jim has got a car loan, what kind of a car loan do we have in there?
So Jim at the moment has a $30,000 car loan.
Okay. And in your experience, they're pretty high, pretty low. I'm not a car guy at all. That just seems like a lot to me, but I know most people would probably spend that without blinking.
Yeah, look, for a single person, it's probably a little bit on the lower side, but it's still like quite a decent amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So $30,000 on a car loan. If he gets rid of that, so he either sells the car and maybe buys something smaller outright, or if he ends up using the extra income that he's now got from savings to pay that off, It's going to take him a little while, but still, if he could pay it off, what does it change to for Jim?
Yeah, so it now increases to 139,000.
139,000. That's not as much as I thought it would be.
No.
139. How does this usually work with car loans? Are they normally like a factor of 1, 2?
So it's really based on the repayments per month. So an average car loan is normally stretched over a 7-year loan term. And that's kind of in line with the effective life of that asset.
So if Jim actually had his car loan over 5 years, that would affect his borrowing even more.
Yes.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So is this something that you see a lot of people then going, all right, I'm just going to roll it into the mortgage, even though I'm going to pay heaps more interest because now I'm paying a car loan over 30 years. Borrowing power wise, do you see many people doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if it's something that's not aligned to a business where you're wanting to claim GST, this is just your car that you use for private use, doing something like this, you're right, over the life of that loan, if you don't pay it down fast, you're going to pay more interest. However, it does actually significantly increase your borrowing capacity as opposed to keeping it as a regular car loan.
And how would you kind of approach that as a question when you're sitting down with a broker? Do you literally just say like, what if we put it in the mortgage?
Not many people actually know about this and how you can roll it into a home loan. So it's very rare that I get asked that question. It's something that because we do this every day, we just suggest it as an option.
Well, that sounds like that's absolutely worth asking the question if that's someone's situation.
Yep.
So we're up to $139,000 for Jim. What about John? What's his car worth?
So the loan on his car is $60,000.
Again, that seems like a lot to me, but that's not, is it?
I mean, look, it probably could be higher to be honest, but yeah, it's still quite a lot of debt for a car loan.
I know I'm coming across as such a stooge right now, but anyway, I'm sure there's plenty of people that love their cars and that's something that makes them happy. So let's say that John was in that category, spending 60 grand, he's got himself a nice whatever, but he's going, nah, it's time to knuckle down. I want to invest in property.
Yep.
How much can he borrow from 105? What does it jump up to?
So yeah, if he closes out that car loan, it'll actually jump to 174.
174.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's still not really expanding the shopping list much.
Yeah.
But we're only looking at step 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so step 2, 174,000. All right, so 60 grand car loan going from 105,000 to 174,000 for John. Now, for argument's sake, if John had 60 grand in savings, would he be better off just paying it off? Because if it's only boosting it by about 70, my instinct's saying no, but what's your broker instinct saying?
Yeah, so buying first property, we're restricted by how much our borrowing capacity is versus savings to buy that first property. So yeah, you can throw all your savings to pay off that car loan.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, your borrowing capacity will increase, but then you've got no money to buy the property. So for the incremental increase, it kind of doesn't make sense to do this.
Yeah, okay. So if that was more of a multiplier of it shot his borrowing capacity up to 300 or something big, then it's like, well, maybe you'd look into it.
Yeah.
But really, it's only kind of almost increasing at what it's worth.
Yeah. I mean, to part ways with all of your savings just to increase your borrowing capacity by that much, you'd probably want to be looking at what other levers you could pull on to increase your borrowing capacity whilst preserving your savings.
And there's a few more as we get a little bit further down this list that really have a bit more of that slingshot effect to it.
Yeah, that's right.
Moving on then. So next, credit cards. If you use them properly, there's some amazing hacks out there.
Yes.
But if you don't use them properly, you can hack yourself pretty bad. What's Jim done to himself and how much is his credit card limit?
Okay, so Jim's got a credit card of $7,500.
7,500. And again, common?
For someone on that kind of earnings, yeah, like that's pretty common.
Yeah?
Sometimes we see more, so yeah.
Now, $7,500 actually. And can you open up a little bit about credit cards and how they're assessed? Because I think there's a bit of a common misconception with even if you only owe a couple of $1,000s versus limits, like how do the banks look at that?
You've got a zero balance owing because you're really good with managing your money, but your limit, just like Jim, is $7,500.
Yep.
The bank will actually assess your borrowing capacity purely on the limit of that credit card as opposed to the balance. So like how much you can spend within your limit.
Right. So Jim's looking at this going, but I've just got 50,000 Qantas points. I want to upgrade to business class, get there nice and cheap.
Yep.
But it's like, I'm not spending money on it. I've got this down pat. But the bank's going, we don't care because you can max that out to 7.5 tomorrow.
Yeah. Like he could go to the casino and just put it all down tomorrow for all they care.
Just like chuck it on the table.
Yeah. Casually.
All right. What happens to Jim's borrowing power from 139 if he cancels that credit card tomorrow? So he's not even paying it off potentially. He's just literally going, don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
What happens?
So it increases to 180,000.
180,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're still not shooting the lights out, but we've almost doubled borrowing capacity. Actually, no, we've more than doubled it now. Was it zero to begin with?
Yeah. We started at zero.
Okay. Yeah. So it's up an infinite percent then, I guess, technically.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so 180,000. So moving down to John, what's his credit card situation and how's that affecting it if he gets rid of it?
So John's got a $15,000 credit card. So
Okay.
to be honest, yeah, we do see more than that sometimes, but same thing. If he were to close that today and was able to do it, his borrowing capacity would actually increase to 251,000.
251. Okay, so he's gone from 174 to 251, and in the very beginning he was at $76,000.
Yep.
Now, $15,000. You say you see bigger than that. Is this the kind of thing that every now and then someone just walks in with like a handbag full of credit cards, or is this like pretty common that it's like? Again, I'm not privy to this kind of stuff. How big do you normally see with this?
So it's kind of a combination. We either see like one or two really big ones, and when I say big, it could be anywhere from like $30,000 to $50,000 for a single card, or it could be a collection of smaller ones that get close to that same sort of number.
Okay, do the banks look at it any differently of having 10 cards of $10,000 limits versus $100,000 card?
Purely based on the limits, no, but if you've hit up a bank 10 times for different credit cards, I'd maybe want to know what your credit score looks like, because constantly doing that on your credit score, it could potentially have an impact.
On that then, so for anyone that is going down like the Jim route, hacking the Qantas points, whatever it is, should they be concerned if they're getting a new credit card every 6 months just to like get free like points?
Yeah, so if your goal is to get Qantas points but then also build a property portfolio, keeping an eye on your credit report, I should say, is really important.
Where can people find a copy of their credit report?
Equifax is a good place to look. You're entitled to a free report every 12 months.
Equifax. Okay. I'm sure we'll link that in the show notes below. That's going to be really helpful. Yep. I've never looked at my credit score. We should do that later.
Todd, I don't know what to say.
You know yours?
Yes.
Yeah. You had to think for a second. All right. I'm curious now, but anyway, I got to stay on track. So $251,000 for John. $15,000 credit card, like you said, it's a little bit high, but that's certainly not as high as some people that walk in the door have. But we're still not done yet. We've started with HEM. We've gone to car loans. We've gone to credit cards. So basically, first one is tighten the belt. Next one's get rid of some debt. Third one is basically, well, I guess not even get rid of debt. Get rid of the quick ability for debt, because there could be nothing on it, but it could be there as a limit. Now we're talking about what's this HECS.
Yes.
So you've gone to uni. You've got a degree. Yep. Or potentially going through it, still getting it.
Yep.
Okay. Talk to me about how this changes things, because from what you and I discussed before, this was mind-boggling.
Yeah. So when it comes to paying off loans, this is normally the last one you do. And the reason I say that is this is actually the cheapest debt you'll probably ever have. And the reason why is the repayments, they're actually indexed to inflation.
Okay.
So inflation typically is lower than bank interest rates at the moment. So when you're focusing on which debt to pay down because it's impacting lifestyle and repayments, that's the one that you focus on last because it's the cheapest.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically, what's inflation sitting at now? Around that kind of 3.5%-ish?
Yeah, around that figure. So compared to bank loans, we're almost looking at double.
All right. So, but let's say that instead of looking at it as we can save more money on the interest, they're looking at, well, I think I can outperform and invest better to get more returns.
Yes.
Or better returns rather than more returns. If Jim gets rid of his HECS debt, first of all, what is his HECS debt?
Okay, so Jim's been obviously in the workforce for a little bit of a while. He's been working. His current balance at the moment is $10,000.
$10,000. And again, for what you see, pretty standard, pretty low?
Yeah, someone earning that amount, it might be a little bit higher, but sometimes it can be lower as well.
And if he just goes, that's it, one fell swoop, or he uses his $1,000 a month from his HEM that he's saving to go straight into his HECS debt, what does it change from? Goes from 180 to?
It goes to 264.
To 264,000. Okay. Now I can feel like there's a whole bunch of people going, Todd, you said this was a game. You said it was mind-boggling. My mind is not boggled. 264,000. I'm still not buying anything. If you're a child from the 90s, as Tim Shaw would say, but wait, there's more. Just stay with us because it gets even better. But $264,000 from zero originally.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is from paying off a $10,000 debt.
Yep.
So not getting rid of anything that is out of this world, it's going to take 6 years to pay off. This is something that could potentially be done in anywhere between 6 and 24 months, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Now, John's situation, he was at 251,000 before for his borrowing power.
Yep.
Where is he sitting at if he gets rid of his HECS debt? How much is it?
Yeah. So his is sitting at $20,000.
20,000. Yep.
And yeah, same thing. If he was able to pay that off, his borrowing capacity would actually jump to 484.
Okay, so he's not buying in Sydney, but if he wants to go borderless, he's got markets that are open to him now.
Yeah, he can do it.
Okay, and what yield are we basing this off again?
This is a conservative 4.5% rental yield.
4.5% rental yield.
Yeah.
All right, because I know that's one of the levers that we're going to pull in a second as well to see how that changes things.
Yes.
But so right now, John has gone from $76,000 not being able to borrow anything or not being able to buy anything.
Yep.
This is way more than doubling borrowing capacity. And essentially he's paid off a few debts. Even if this has taken him a year or two to get to, he's now in the position to actually get into the property market.
Yeah.
Okay, exciting for John. So as far as the HECS side of things, talk to me about that a little bit more, because it feels like that's made a much bigger difference for John than it has for Jim. And I know his debt was bigger, but how does that actually work?
Yeah, so in the bank's eyes, how they actually assess the commitments for HECS, it's indexed to your income. So even though John's HECS debt was double Jim's, his income is also significantly bigger. So when they're calculating the repayments, they're actually basing it on his gross income.
So you could have two people with the exact same HECS debt, but if one of them earns 200 and one of them earns 100, totally different situation as far as how it affects it.
Yeah, like the 200K earner in that scenario would probably have a higher like repayment in the bank size as opposed to the $100,000 person.
Right, because their repayments higher, their liabilities are higher, so the bank's looking at their serviceability as lower.
Yeah, and so that comes back to when it's looking at what we can pull on to increase borrowing capacity.
Yep.
If it's going to have a significant jump like it does for John, that's probably when it would make sense to pay off your HECS debt.
So as far as paying down the HECS is concerned, if we're looking at like 10 and 20,000, like again, decent amounts of money, but not like hundreds of thousands, it's not huge amounts. Yeah. If someone, because I know John and Jim don't have PPRs in this stage or in these situations, but if someone does, because a lot of people, let's face it, they've bought their primary place of residence first and then 5 years, 10 years, however much goes by, let's get into property investing. Yep. They might have a bit of equity behind them. Do you see it much where people go, all right, we can pull out 100 grand, 200 grand equity. Yep. Let's just get rid of this 10, 20 grand HECS debt. Or is that a bad idea? Like, how does that work because it's kind of paying debt with debt?
That is one way of definitely viewing it. And I think, look, it's something like I kind of said, this is the last debt that you want to pay down because it is the cheapest. However, if the long-term goal is to buy an investment property and it can be very clearly demonstrated by paying this HECS debt out, it will increase your borrowing capacity and allow you to buy that first or that next investment property, then yeah, it's kind of like, well, do you want to wait for your HECS debt to organically decrease or do you want to secure that investment property first?
As far as paying it down, it really sounds like it's going to be a case-by-case basis, as all of this is.
Yes.
But again, coming back to what I said at the very beginning, the thing that I like about this is you might be listening to this going, I don't have a car loan. I feel the same about cars as you do, Todd, or I don't have a credit card, but actually I do have a HECS debt. It's not about being exactly Jim or exactly John. It's about looking at each of these controllables and going, which lever can I actually pull here to change my situation? Afterpay, it's not changing much. I was surprised. I thought that was going to change heaps. And you were like, it's kind of just more of a fine tuning one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you're kind of on the cusp between maybe using a first tier lender or a second tier lender, this could be the difference in moving that needle.
Okay. Yeah. And so let's say people have got, what has Jim got in our situation?
Okay. So Jim's got a very small limit of $1,000 in Afterpay.
I've never used it. Do you find $1,000 pretty common or is it not that common?
It can sometimes be more. And I mean, when banks look at these commitments, they actually assess it in the same light as credit cards as well.
So it's like having a credit card you never really applied for.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So if Jim was to change it, so currently he's at 264,000.
Yep.
Now if he goes, get rid of the $1,000 Afterpay.
Yeah.
Once you borrow on
270.
All right. It's like $6,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's still, it's certainly not shooting the lights out, but it's upping it a little bit. I feel for Jim and I really want to fix his situation by getting to the next two. And the bonus is that is, I'm going to use the phrase mind-boggling again. So things really change. But before we do, Afterpay for John, how much do things change for him? So he's at 480. What does it change to when he leaves his? So
for John, we've got a Afterpay limit of $2,000. So removing that for him, his borrowing capacity would increase to 494.
494. Yeah. Okay. So John's got a few more options in front of him. Yeah. They've paid down their debts. They've tightened their belts. They have got rid of some HECS. And now they're looking at it going, okay, what are the other things that are in my control? We've got this broken up into then the property control side of things, so the rental yield, and then also the lender control side of things. Let's talk about yield, because I asked you before we started, what's the highest rental yield that's come across your desk in recent weeks? You said something insane. What was it again?
15%.
That's not normal though for anyone listening. Kudos to that person, I think. Depends on where they got it, but it's pretty huge.
It was good, yeah.
A normal sort of higher rental yield, something that's like not shooting for the stars, but it's like, this is doable. Yeah. What are we changing things to?
So like we're looking at about 6%.
Jim's changing from a 4.5% yield to a 6% yield, and that's changed his borrowing power to what?
319.
There's a big jump.
Yep.
Now for anyone going, why? What's the answer?
The reason why is basically with the rental income, it's an additional income source.
Yep.
So holding everything else constant, this is just more income to you, which means more borrowing capacity.
if he was to actually, not the 15%, because I feel like that's madness, but if he was to find maybe more like a 7%,
Yep.
or how much can he borrow if it was 7?
So if it was 7%, it would actually increase to 351.
351,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so a 7%. I feel like that's doable, but it's getting pretty tricky though to find a 7% that's not super risky.
Yeah, like you'd have to get incredibly lucky. Maybe it's got a granny flat in it or something like that. So yeah.
So 319,000 at a 6% yield, which I feel is absolutely achievable in some markets right now. Again, definitely on the higher side, but not out of this world. If we look at John's situation, what changes for him if he gets a 6% yielding property?
So if he gets a 6% yield, his borrowing capacity would increase to 546.
So if we're talking about the yield side of things, in increasing the yield, I know there's a whole bunch of different options if we're going to start spending money, developing, adding value, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes it can actually just come down to, I guess, asking the right questions and having the right sort of setup in your team.
Yeah.
Because you might get a property that's maybe under rented or vacant.
Yes.
What kind of different levers again can people pull on to try and make sure that they've got the highest rental yield possible from a borrowing power perspective?
Yeah. So when you're building that property team and you're interviewing property managers, at this point, I suppose, if your property that you identified is under rented or vacant, that's when you can go back to that panel of property managers who you have interviewed and say, hey, here's my property. Can you please do an appraisal? I guess as a savvy investor, you'd probably want to go with the one that's going to back you the most and help you increase your borrowing capacity the most.
Because some can be super conservative as well.
Yeah.
And they might be looking at that going, oh, let's just say 600. But they're like, we could probably get 650, but I want to under promise and over deliver. Yeah. Whereas in the bank size, they'll just go 600. They don't look at maybe they're under promising and over delivering. So if you're making sure that you're using a rental letter that's not above what it is, but just really at that top end, then that could be the difference between securing and not.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Okay. So now second tier lenders, we've gone from, for John, $76,000 to $546,000. For Jim, $0 to $319. Jim's maybe he's buying some units in Cairns. It's doable, but still pretty challenging. If he goes to a second tier lender though, what opens up for Jim?
So maintaining a 6% rental yield.
Yep.
Going to a second tier lender, his maximum borrowing capacity is 366.
366,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is from 319 to 366, and this is just to a second tier lender.
Yes.
Okay, and for everyone else that's listening right now going, second tier lender? What is a second tier lender, and what's the downside to going with one of them?
Yeah, so I guess to classify the tiers of lending, first tier lenders, it's all the banks that we know and see on TV and stuff. So Big Four and a few others. Second tier lenders, they are a little bit more unknown. And I guess the way to kind of think about them is they will assess your loans just like all the big players.
Okay.
Some of the key differences though is they will actually load a smaller servicing buffer on top of your existing rates. So by that, you actually have a slightly better borrowing capacity. And then the second kind of layer to the second tier banks is some of them just have policies which suit investors a little bit better.
Okay, when you say they have policies that suit investors, as in the policies are their guidelines of the boxes they need to tick to give you money, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so they might, for example, have a bit more leniency towards what their maximum rental yield is, or they might just have a different way of assessing your household expenditure, for example.
So when you say maximum rental yield, what are the big four sort of cap out at?
So it's between 6 and 7%.
So if you did have some smash it out the park house and granny deal that was 8%, you're saying some of the big four would be we don't care what kind of super duper deal you put together.
Yeah.
This is our cap.
Yep.
Right. But then if they go to a second tier lender, then they'll look at it and go, okay, it is what it is.
Yeah. Some will either have that cap or they'll just look at it on face value.
Okay. And what about then if we're going to a third tier lender? Because I know we didn't really do this for this exercise, but it's my next question though, is if that's the downside for a second tier, are you holding extra risk with a third tier?
Yeah, moving down to that last step of the ladder.
Yep.
Third tier lenders will look at your existing loans just like second tier lenders. However, they'll either apply an even smaller buffer or they'll use the existing repayments.
And they're not doing this because they're nice guys. Like they're charging more rates, aren't they?
Correct. Yeah. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The rates aren't that great.
Yeah.
But then, if you've had your portfolio structured really well at the beginning, like maybe the whole portfolio is on interest only, for example, with these types of banks, the rates aren't great, but you'll have a way more borrowing capacity because some of them will assess it based on your actual payments.
And out of interest, what would happen to Jim then if he went, cool, I'm going like third tier lender?
So holding everything else constant, his borrowing capacity at this stage doesn't actually increase a lot. It actually goes to 372.
So it's not that much.
No, but as he starts to get more properties under his belt, it actually could incrementally increase.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's not the beginning that it really changes things. When you go into third tier lenders, it's when maybe you're 3, 4, 5 rentals deep.
Correct. Yeah. And it's actually a question that we get asked a lot. It's like, oh, why don't we just go to a third tier lender first? And it's like, well, why would you when you can go to a first tier lender where your rates are going to be lower, your cash flow is definitely going to be better because the rates are lower. But also, as you start building and buying more property, you want to use those first tier banks because generally speaking, their valuations are higher and accessing that equity at the beginning really helps you kind of snowball through the rest of the portfolio a bit more. And
when we say like third tier lenders, these are still like reputable financial institutions. This isn't like Don with a baseball bat, like in a bag of money.
These aren't really like proper shark loans or like private loans, I suppose, as you could say. Like they're not very well known publicly, but I mean, at the end of the day, they're not going to completely like kill your like lifestyle, for example, as opposed to like shark loans or like private lending.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And so I think the reason I'm saying it is because if someone's interested in it, it's worth asking the question, but you wouldn't start there.
Absolutely not. No.
So 366 is if he was to go to a second tier lender. Yeah. And if John, who is at 546,000 with a 6% rental yield, if he was to go to a second tier lender, how does things change for John?
Yeah. So it increases to 594.
594, so almost 600 grand from $76,000.
Yeah.
I feel like we've like reverse clickbaited because like we said it's doubling your borrowing power. It's like this is almost 10x borrowing power.
Yeah.
And we're still not even done. There's one more step.
Yep, and it's a big one.
Okay, so 594,000. John has got a lot of options open to him now.
Absolutely.
He can buy in a whole bunch of different places in Perth. There's even some sections in Brizzy that are open to him, Adelaide that are open to him. He's probably still not in Sydney, where it'd be real tough. There's a whole bunch of different areas in Melbourne that would be open to him though. Jim, however, still a little bit trickier.
Yep.
All right, Jim's on 90K. He's a single dude. He's trying his best. Actually reminds me of a guy that I know at the moment that I'm helping buy. Let's say he's in full sacrifice mode. It's time to go to the bonus, which is absolutely not for everyone. I know there's going to be some people listening going, I'm not doing that. But if you are willing to really sacrifice it for 6 months, a year, 2 years, what's the bonus?
So like you said, this is not for everyone and it actually is a pretty decent lifestyle change. But the hack here is actually going back to living at home rent-free.
You say decent lifestyle change. Decent, like maybe if mum cooks pretty well.
I mean, like that's pretty good, right? Like mum's cooking's great, but not everyone wants to go and live back home with their parents. Yep. So it is a big decision to make, but I think if you're really focused on building a portfolio, and it doesn't have to be something that you do for many years, like as we were discussing before we did this show, like it could just be for 6, 12 months where you just go ham and just buy as many properties as you can.
It's why I'm such a big proponent of this, and it's why I was happy to do this, like chatting with you, because I've done it and you've done it as well.
Yeah.
And it was both, the keys for both of us to really start building the portfolio.
Yep.
We could have before, but like we can see right now with Jim, 366,000, it's doable, but it's trickier.
Yeah.
If Jim goes, you know what, I'm going to live with mum for a year.
Yep.
Okay, not forever, just for a year. What does it jump up from 366,000 to?
Yeah, so using that same second tier lender, it actually increases to 766.
I'm just pausing for dramatic effect because
it's just
okay. There's our mind-boggling. So it doubles essentially.
Yeah.
So $766,000, and that's with a second tier lender and a 6% yield.
Yeah.
Okay, and out of interest, what's the highest one, like for a third tier or a lender that no one's heard of?
You're looking at $858.
All right, $858,000. So from $0 to 858,000, and just going back again. So we've started with tightening the belt, lowering his hem, 100,000 to 139,000 to 180 to 200. What was that? 264, 270, 319, 366. For anyone that's listening on Spotify or iTunes right now and they can't see what's going on, I'm not doing a Rain Man impersonation. This is just following the lead of how he can actually borrow things. These are just the different increments that have changed as Jim was borrowing. And like you can see at the very beginning, it's not much. But again, if there's just one of these takeaways, let's say Jim's like, you know what? I love my Uber Eats. I love spending money. I don't want to do that. But, you know, I will actually move home with mum. That's going to change things hugely. But maybe it's like, actually, no, I can just pay down the car loan. I can't do this. Again, all of these in isolation are still going to move the needle forward. Some a lot more than others, but it kind of comes back to the difference. And this is how I always talk about it. And I think you and I have talked about this before. It's sacrifice versus time. If you want to achieve it really quickly, your sacrifice needs to grow most of the time. If you want to achieve it over a longer period of time, your sacrifice can go down. So it's really coming back to how much do you want to sacrifice versus how quick do you want to achieve it.
Yeah, 100%. Comes back to how badly do you want it.
Yeah. And so as far as John's concerned, I'm just curious now, because I know obviously if he's got a wife and a child, moving in with mum and dad or mum or dad, whatever, is not really going to be an option a lot of the time. It's not an option though.
Yes.
It's just be a really difficult one, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But if he did, what does it change?
So look, it definitely would be harder for him than Jim.
Absolutely.
But if he did do it, the same second tier lender, his borrowing capacity would increase to $1.1 million.
Okay. 1.1 million. And this is a 6% yield still?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And if he went, so that's the same lender, if he went as high as he could, third tier?
It would be $1.26 million.
I should have known a drum roll then. You said 1.26 million.
Yeah.
That is nuts. Okay, so we've gone from $76,000 to 1.26 million for John.
Yeah.
These are the changes that are the difference between comfortable retirement and talking about what we should have done. And the thing, and this is what I personally love about property investing, and I know you do as well, Morgan, because you're heavily invested too, is that it's these sacrifices, these little changes that you can do now that are the difference between, like, even if you and I never buy anything else ever again and just take a knee, it's like already just having the few investments behind us, retirement's going to be so much more comfortable. The thing I love about John and Jim's situation is this isn't about them shooting the lights out and buying like 10, 20, 30 properties. Even if they do this for a year, 2 years, and then buy a property, 2 properties, whatever they actually want to do for their goals, it's gone from this isn't possible. I sat down on a website and did a mortgage calculation. It told me I could only borrow 76. I guess property investing is not for me, to $1.2 million.
Yeah. Like
if that was to be invested and then you take a knee for 10 years, 20 years, that 1.2 is now turned into what, $4-ish million if the market continues the way it historically has.
Yeah, so this is definitely possible. And to talk from like my own experience with one of my clients, for example, back when I started as a mortgage broker, I actually helped one client, very similar situation to John. So mum and dad with one kid, they actually moved back home to live with family.
So they actually did it?
Yeah, they actually made this sacrifice.
Yeah, right.
So for them, what the goal was is they wanted to buy a high quality asset in Sydney.
Okay.
So basically, like the only way to do this was for them to move back home with mum and dad.
Okay.
Since like 3 years from now, that property itself has actually increased by more than 50%. So really like short period of time, just because they bought so well.
So 50%. So they've gone up from, what, did you mind me asking, what did they roughly pay?
Yeah, so they bought it for $750.
And so now it's worth what, 1.3-ish, 1.2-ish?
Yeah, like 1.4.
All right, so now they're sitting on a very handsome amount of equity, but I'm imagining that started as this is pretty challenging, like this is a bit of a problem we need to solve.
They actually didn't think they could do anything when they came to me. So what we kind of looked at, like we kind of have with John and Jim, is we're like, okay, well, what strings can we pull on? Because the goal was to get a high quality asset that they could ride through the property boom. So they bought around COVID, and prices since then have obviously gone up quite a lot. So we looked at all the different options that we could do, and one of them was HECS. But the biggest impact, as we've kind of seen with these two examples, is going back home, living with family. And they were more than happy to do that. Obviously, mum and dad were great, and that gave them the capacity to buy that property.
Out of interest, if it goes more like all right, I can't move in with mum and dad for whatever reason, that's not an option. Yeah. If you were to just go, all right, I'm going to go into sacrifice mode, but I'm going to do it by renting a room off of a friend or something along those lines. So then all of a sudden my rent drops from the $700 a week to maybe $250 a week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's still having a pretty profound impact in itself, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. Like everyone talks about living at home with mum and dad. It doesn't actually have to be them. It could be, like a friend that's got a spare room. It may just be mates rates that you're paying, but that also shifts the needle just as much as it has for Jim and John as well.
The other thing that I like about this, Morgan, is that it's a bit of a to-do list, because it changes this from, how is it possible to sit down with a broker and like we said, not everything's applicable, but find the things that are applicable for you. And then that becomes a to-do list of anywhere between 1 or whatever this is, like 7 different things that you can do. Start knocking them on the head, whether that's 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, whatever you're wanting to commit to. Again, it's the sacrifice versus the time achieving the goal. And there's something about the tangibility of like, do these things and this will happen. Yep. All of the vagueness is really removed from it, which personally I find very, very comforting as a property investor. But as far as an action step's concerned, something that, in addition to that, sitting down with a broker, this is what I think everyone needs to do, is sit down with a broker, find out these things, find out where you are now, where you want to be, and then fill the gaps in between with a to-do list.
Yep.
What's an action step that you've got that someone can pull out their headphones right now? They think, well, I'm John, I'm Jim, I'm really close to those situations, and they can just start walking down the path with it.
It's quite common for brokers just to say flat no to people. And I don't believe in that. Like you kind of said, it's all about the plan. So if it's a no, like at this point in time, it's like, okay, well, let's put a plan in place for you to achieve your property goals. So we've touched on, changing your living expenses, changing, for example, what your bad debts are, focusing on the property, on the lender. And so it's really just like we kind of said, putting a plan in place to achieve that goal. And if I'm being really honest, we're reviewing everything. So another thing to keep in mind is also your income as well.
So looking at this is like, if we're putting a plan in place for the next year or two, chances are your income's potentially going to change as well. So take that into account. Yeah,
look, it'd be silly not to include that. I mean, it's as long as you're able to influence it and do that, then this is worth including in that plan.
All right. So lastly then, if I can put you on the spot a bit, if Jim did increase his income, let's be realistic about this. Like, he's not going to just double it to 180. What if he increased it to like 100, 110 maybe? What changes there from his 858,000 shooting the lights out, going from zero? What could he borrow?
So if Jim goes to 110 per annum salary, second tier lender, you're basically looking at about 900,000 in borrowing capacity.
And that's with the second tier lender?
Yes.
Okay, so what if he does a third tier lender like the 858?
So that actually jumps up to over $1 million. So
over $1 million if he's happy to go third tier.
Yep.
Second tier is 900,000. And if he wants to stay with one of the big four?
You're looking at about 830,000.
So from a first tier lender, we're looking at 830,000 to $1 million from a third tier lender. So there's differences like, what is that, $170,000.
Yeah.
I'm curious. John was at 1.26 with a third tier. What could he get to if he upped it as well? Let's say he went down to 220, 230, something like that.
So if we go with like 230, for example, second tier lender, you're almost at 1.3 million in lending.
And third?
You're almost at 1.5 million.
Okay, so 1.5 is maxing out. Out of interest, what is the interest rate on that, on 1.5 million?
It's 8.59%.
8.5. Okay.
Yeah,
so they're not doing it because they're good guys. All right. But he can secure from $76,000 if over the course of a year, 2 years, whatever needs to get implemented gets implemented to clean up his situation, has an income increase to 230. It's jumped up to well into the kind of low to mid 1 millions.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this and you think that property investing was out for you, I really hope this has changed your mind, because I know how much it can change your life. And I think that so many people do look at online calculators or talk to friends and family or talk to Dave at the bank. I don't know why everyone's named Dave in my head whenever I reference someone. But anyway, Dave at the bank, they're like, oh, like you can only borrow X. It is so important to keep asking questions, to talk with someone like Morgan, to go like this, what can we do? It's not like, what can I do now? And that's it. It's, well, what if I change this? What can we do? What if I change that? What can we do? And you've just seen the difference in the power in John and Jim's situation, going from nothing to then being able to actually start setting up their lives for absolute financial freedom. And it all comes from having that choice to go, I'm going to start asking some questions here. I'm going to start talking to the right people, and then I'm going to start making some life changes. How big you want these sacrifices to be, obviously totally up to you. That's obviously a very personal side of things. But the fact that it has gone from impossible to possible is the biggest takeaway. And I hope you absolutely action this. And I feel like legally I have to say this is not financial advice. Please seek independent professional financial advice from a qualified professional. But take this to them. Take this, what you've just heard here, because this could absolutely change your life. Speaking of life-changing events, I do have to ask Morgan the most important question of the entire show. What a segue.
What pizza have you eaten?
Morgan Bushell, what is your favorite pizza?
Yeah, so my favorite pizza at the moment is barbecue chicken.
Barbecue chicken.
Yes.
Are you getting this anywhere special?
Domino's. Guilty pleasure.
See, this is the thing, right? I talk to so many successful property investors. Every now and then I've got people that will say like, oh, some like cool little cute out of the way place, or they got this on holiday. Yeah. The amount of people that say Domino's makes me feel better about eating so much Domino's pizza, because I'm like, good. Everyone else that I know that is really successful in property, they also see the value. It's like $7 special. Let's get that.
Hell yeah.
Oh, mate. Anyway, this has been an episode, like I've said so many times, that I think is genuinely going to change people's lives, man. I really appreciate you doing. There has been a stupid amount of numbers that you've had to crunch behind the scenes to make this happen. But are there any final words of wisdom or anything you'd like to leave with everyone today before we part ways, mate?
Yeah, like this is what it's all about. I mean, this is also why I love my job, because when I get to show people this and what is possible and what strings we can pull on to achieve that long-term goal, this is where I get to see the light bulb turn on. It all comes back to how badly you want it and how passive you also want to be as well.
I couldn't agree more. Morgan Bushell from Full Circle Finance, thank you so much for coming on the show, mate.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it.